You're cutting out. Can you repeat that? Go for production. Go for production. I said go for production. Production.
That's right. You're listening to a podcast about TV and film production. Join us as we converse with industry leaders and gain insight into their strategies, their systems, and best practices in bringing a script to life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Brendan Riley.
My name is Brandon Riley, your host today, and our guest on this episode is Jason Roberts. Jason is a member of the DGA and works as a UPM, first AD, second AD, and has worked on some very well-known TV shows and movies. I'll list a few of these: The Orville, Downsizing, American Made, Transformers: The Last Night, Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, Jurassic World, Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, Too Fast, Too Furious, Collateral, and the list goes on. That's quite a resume.
You're dating me.
So Jason also started out in the film industry working as a production assistant before joining the DGA Trainee program, where he was fast-tracked onto these large sets. Anything else you'd like to mention about your past work experience?
Well, I'm from Los Angeles. I was born and raised out there, and being in Los Angeles growing up, you're around the business, at least peripherally. You know, you're always around it because that's what is in Los Angeles and why all those wonderful people head there to get into it. So I didn't have anyone in my family in the business, but I was a very tenacious young kid, and I always knew I wanted to do something within it. So at a very young age, I started trying to figure out how I was going to get in it, and I dabbled in writing. And while I was in high school, I was taking UCLA extension classes in script writing and television writing, and I was looking for internships. So while I was in high school, I'd work as an intern on independent films in the office as an office PA, and I found a few mentors along the way who kind of guided me, because I didn't know at that point that I wanted to be an assistant director or producer or UPM or where I've ended up at this point in my career. But being a production assistant and an intern, you get an opportunity to watch all the different departments, work and determine what you like best about each one and what you don't like about it. And after not very long while, a short while, I determined that those first ADs were very interesting people who were at the hub in the center of all the activity, and that appealed to me. So I centered my energies in that direction and ended up, prior to getting the Directors Guild trainee program, which was a class of 93, I worked as an assistant to Richard Donner for several years. I was an assistant to Joel Silver for a short while. I was an assistant to some actors like John Ritter and Jamie Lee Curtis, and a lot of different people, and Albert Brooks on the way up. And then when I got into the program, all my energies were centered on actual on-set assistant directing production work.
You know, in a lot of colleges, they don't really talk about ADs that much, it seems like, in film schools.
It's not called the Assistant Directors Guild. It's called the Directors Guild. It's funny because the DGA Trainee program is a joint program between the Producers Guild and the Directors Guild, and they actually recruit at colleges and have to explain to people what it is that we do, because most people that are not in the business or maybe not as interested or involved in films past seeing them don't stay for the credits, and they're the kind of people who always ask, what's the best boy, and the AD falls into that sort of thing too. Is that an assistant to the director? Do they get the coffee? That's they don't know. My own folks had no idea what I was doing until I tried to explain it to them and take them to the set and show them, and I don't know if they still get it or not, but they certainly appreciate the career I've had.
Yeah, my parents are always like, so you're a director? I'm like, no, Mom, I'm not.
I tell them to go watch State and Maine, the David Mamet movie, with the AD that's in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Or something like that, where the player or something,
Or Swimming with Sharks.
Well, I was intimately involved with that movie because George, the director of that, and I were assistants together over at Silver Pictures before he went off and did that.
So I see all these movies with Tom Cruise. So talk about that.
Well, I don't always get to I don't always get to choose my films. Sometimes in those instances, the last couple of Tom Cruise pictures that I've been involved with, I was working as the key second assistant director, and I'm hired primarily by the first assistant director, who's the one who gets the movies, who's hired by the producers, the director, and so on. So, I never know who's going to be in it half the time, at certain points in my career. I guess I've been able to mold my career a little bit more now, but I've worked with a couple of different ADs who have worked, on movies that Tom is in, and I, he's a lovely guy. He's actually one of my favorite people to work with. He's his work ethic is probably tops bar none. I mean, he's a guy who gives 100% of the time, and you have to always be on your A game on doing these kind of shows with him, as evidenced by the kind of movies that he does with the big action sequences or big complicated logistical variables, traveling around the world on these different locations, or using equipment that you haven't used before, or trying to figure out how to whatever it is, on the Mission Impossibles, it's, scaling a building, and in the, American Made, it was flying planes, and he's a pilot himself, so there's always a learning curve. But I will say he always shows up ready. He always is, he's about as professional as I've ever worked with. So, and he's a super nice guy. And so I've quite enjoyed working on his movies. I would work on his movies till I can't work on movies anymore, except I couldn't do 2 in a row. I needed a break in between, because he is just like, it's pretty relentless in a good way, but it's just like the focus is rehearsal, test, shoot, go back and do it again, whatever we're doing, it's just nonstop, which is fun and good. It keeps you on your toes.
But it wears you out.
Yeah, it can, because an AD has to have a lot of endurance and stamina. It's a very physical job. It's a managerial job. It's a creative job, but it's definitely physical. I mean, some of the shows I've done, I've been in the jungles of Colombia. I've been in the jungles of Cambodia. I've been in the jungles of India. I've been in, the ghettos of, some places in the Middle East. It ranges from, place to place, but the hours, as a second AD, you're working, 17, 18-hour days. As a first AD, you're probably working about 14 or 15-hour days, depending on, how much, time you dedicate before and after you're shooting each day. And, you have to have an endurance. It's a long race. It's not a short sprint. So, everyone wears those, not Fitbits, but the pedometers, like that are on your phone, the iPhone ones that keep track of your steps. And I remember on a couple of those where, I was having some competitions with some of the guys on my team to see at the end of the day who had the most steps, and whoever had the most steps, they got the, on the weekend they got the free drinks. But we were putting in anywhere from 20 to 40,000 steps a day, which equates to 12 to 17 miles a day every day on your feet. So you're not sitting around, you're moving. And I guess every show has its different logistics, because I've done a half-hour single camera comedy in Los Angeles, a thing for ABC called Better Off Ted a few years ago, and we were all at the LA Center Studios filming, and I still put on about 10,000 steps or 12,000 steps a day, but it's not the same as when you're on one of those big action oriented kind of movies where you're moving around all the time and it's nonstop.
Interesting. So going back to Tom real quick, is there anything that you have to think about when you're working with a high caliber actor like him that you may not have to regularly?
No, I mean, I treat everybody the same. So it could be, him, or it could be Betty White, I don't know. Just a name on the top of my head. I treat everyone with respect, and I respect everybody's process. The actors, and he's a producer too, so he knows the mechanics of making every movie that we've done inside and out also. So he's not one to waste any time or any energy that doesn't move the production forward himself. I mean, I saw him pushing dollies, trying to, get in there to get time to get a shot going, it's like, as an example. But I think every actor and every person on a crew has a process. And I think an assistant director's job is to give them the best ability to, function within that process. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I want them to be in their top form when they show up on the set, ready to get in front of that camera, because whatever that camera shoots is what is going to be iconic forever on screen. That's the image. That's the ones and zeros now that go through, that don't change. And so if there's anything outside of that, or things that would take away from that process of their thinking, or keeping them from getting into that moment, my job as an AD is to shield them from that, at those times, is to handle those things, or work it out with other people to handle those things so that it doesn't affect performance at all. So for an actor like Tom, he already is well ahead. He's already rehearsed. He's already, knows exactly what he wants before he steps foot, on the set. So, kind of give him his space, to do what he does, and, there if he needs anything, I think of myself, and more so now as a unit production manager, but as an AD, as like a concierge, I'm there to able to handle anything. And as an assistant director, sometimes I felt like that, like a bartender in a way, that can listen to your problems and, and make it easier on you, I'm not serving them drinks, but you know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of jobs rolled into one, when working with and taking care of these kind of people who, need to function at very focused levels for, short periods of time.
Yeah, I found that over time, sometimes like makeup artists and hairstylists are like almost like the counselor to the actor. And
well, they're an extension of, the first team themselves, like the actors, some don't like to be fussed with, or, once they go through the works, but other ones rely on them to keep them there. And it's almost like a security blanket for a lot of them. So, yeah. But I know Tom, like, just going back for Tom for probably the last time, because I don't know who wants to hear this stuff, but I just remember I was the second AD on the second unit of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and Chris Castaldi was the first AD, and we were shooting in Dubai, and it was the skyscraper sequence and the dust storm sequence and a few other things tied in there. And at the same time, the main unit was shooting like the ballroom scene at the Indian hotel, where they go, it's a big ball, and we were shooting at the same time. So Tom would start with us from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then he would go on to the first unit from about 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. And they did this for about a week or so straight, and he got about 2 hours of rest in between each one, and not continuous. And he's a machine, but it was great because he had physio trainers and other people working with him. And he told Castaldi and myself that he said, "Don't call me until you need me, but the second you call me, I'll come out there and I'll do what we need to do." And he did all his own stunts, as he's famously known for. And it's funny because when you're up out there on the building, I was watching the rigging guys do all the skyscraper stuff. I was looking at it, and it's 144 floors up there, and I was like, I asked him, I said, when they're doing the rigging for this, I said, how do you guys get out there? And they said, after the first, 2 stories, it doesn't really matter, So anyway, that's enough about Tom.
So when you're, about to be hired onto a project and you are tasked with the process of scheduling a film or helping piece together the schedule, what are some practices that you take into account in terms of what is your process for that?
Well, it's funny. I just had this really interesting cyclical thing happen on a movie, because I break down, and like most ADs and UPMs, we also, in between, working on very specific projects, we get hired to break down and schedule and budget projects for, producers and studios, and it's another side of the business, where we're able to use our skill set, to help get movies made, picked up and greenlit, because when you're, for those of you people that may be listening to this that don't know how it starts, is, from the script, you get a schedule, and once you have that, a general schedule, and I'll get into the details of that if we want to go deeper, they can make a UPM or a producer can make a preliminary budget, and then they can go to the studio and say, this is what it's going to cost, and then they can talk back and forth if they need to rewrite the script to work within a budget, or they need a lot more money for the project in order to make it happen. So we get hired in that preliminary stage. I remember there's a producer, Ian Bryce, who you just mentioned. One of the movies I did with him, a couple of years ago was Transformers Last Night, and I started with Ian back on Joe versus a Volcano, if I'm going to date myself a little bit here, in the late 80s. He was the unit production manager, and I was his PA, and so we did a series of movies together through the years, and every time we were on a movie, he would usually hand me a script and say, I need you to do the inputting and get it into a schedule so I can get a budget, and that would end up being our next movie usually. And I remember at one point in my at that point, at a very short career, he handed me a script and he said, this looks like the next movie we're going to do. We just need to get a budget and a schedule together. And he gave me the script, and I went home to my apartment while we were I think we were shooting The Flood, or it came out as Hard Rain, as Morgan Freeman, Christian Slater, Minnie Driver movie. And I went back and I spent a week breaking down and scheduling this very complicated movie. And after I'd finished, I thought the script was so fantastic. I went to him and I handed everything into him, and he was going to budget it from there and, tweak the schedule. And it wasn't done on computers like it is now. It was, because Movie Magic was still, I learned from him on the old strips that you used to like hand write them on back in the day. But in this instance, I think it was the early version of Movie Magic scheduling where you would print out perforated strips at that point. It was still that early, I believe. Maybe not. But I handed him back the script and I said, Ian, I don't care if I'm the second unit craft service PA. I have to work on this movie. And he said, okay, kid, we'll figure it out. And that was Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, wow.
So at one point in history, I was the only person actually working on that movie in my little apartment in Los Angeles, and then of course it was what it was and became what it became, and I did actually end up working on it with him. So that was a pretty cool thing, to have a mentor like Ian Bryce and have him, take me under his wing. That's you need a little bit of that in this business, and the rest of it you have to have some tenacity. You have to believe in yourself more than anybody else, and you have to do the work. There's no substitute for the work, So, that's, like I said before, given 100% of the time.
So going back to the question, though.
Sorry, tangent.
But I like that story. What's your process, though, when you're in the Movie Magic scheduling program?
Well, I don't start there. I start with the script. So, okay, I'll tell you my process. And every AD has a different process. Right. I remember I had a conversation maybe a year or so ago with Don Sparks about his process. And he's a first AD, and you can look him up, anybody who, cares to. But, he has his colored pens and colored system and all that. And he does very complicated movies also. But it depends on what the movie is. But the first thing I'll do is I'll get a script, and it won't have any scene numbers, and it won't have any... broken out as far as, scene 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so I'll read the script once just straight through. And I've been reading scripts my whole life, so it doesn't take me that long. And I just do it to read the story and get to know it. And then what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll have a trusty little ruler, like one of the, mine happens to be like a very funky, little 3D ruler that has dinosaurs on it that move, that I've had for like 15 years. It's just one of those random, things, but it's like my good luck ruler. I know it sounds silly, but I have that. And what I'll do is then I'll line the script. So I'll look at every scene, and where every scene starts and ends, I'll put a line. And that's all I'll do for the second time I'm reading the script. Okay, so now I've read it twice. Then I'll go back a third time, and every place I've made a line, I'll put a scene number. Okay, or I'll put a scene part, like, 32 part 1 or 32 Apple, 32 Baker, whatever it is. And if it's a montage sequence or something that ties together, or you're cutting back and forth between an action sequence, I'll part out more than just where it says cut to and a new scene heading. Every script is written differently, and everyone will have different variables, so it just depends. So now I've put a number through. So that's the third time I've read the script. Now this all happens within, the first, 3-hour period, and then what I'll do is I'll part out the page count for each of those scenes, because I need this information when I'm going to get to my Movie Magic part of it on the computer, as every AD who's listening to this will know, but everyone who doesn't understand doesn't know. And what it is if you took a single script page, which is an 8.5 by 11 regular piece of, 3-hole punch or, whatever paper. So if you have one of those and you split that into equal parts, there would be 8 inches, right? So they call it an eighth of a page, 2/8 of a page. And so depending on how far down on the page it goes and where my lines are is how long the scene is. And sometimes there, like I said, there's variables to that too. This is an art form. It's not just an exact science. It's a little bit of understanding, like if it's more dialogue based or more, action driven based or description based. Because I mean, if you got the script of Ben-Hur, it's for the chariot race, it just said 2 words, they race, and there you go. There's 6 weeks of filming right there, Or Gone with the Wind, Atlanta burns. There's 2 more words, and it's only an eighth of a page in the script, but it's a lot more, So those are extreme examples, but I'll determine the page count, and I'll go through the whole script again, and I'll denote the page count all the way through. Now that's the 4th time I've read it in about 4 or 5 hours. Okay. Other ADs, and I'm not saying Don Sparks, but Don Sparks, and most ADs then will take a colored highlighter, multicolored highlight, different ones, and they'll part out, they'll highlight out the things that they need to put into their breakdown. And I myself don't do that anymore. I used to, because you would take like a blue highlighter and you'd highlight all the cast in each scene, or make a notation or mark, or you put an orange one that signifies visual effect, or and maybe on certain movies you do need to do that. I had to do that on a breakdown I did a year and a half ago, which I'll tell you the story about in a moment. Or you'll take the yellow, and yellow could be props, or something that you want to put into your breakdown. But when I'm putting a schedule together for a producer or a studio in order to budget a movie, and they need it very quickly, because I can do one of these now in a day or so. It used to take me a lot longer, but I can do, if I sat down for a movie and it's pretty accurate, I can get a first pass out in about 12 to 15 hours. So depending on how rushed they want to do it, Right. But those ADs and the former myself would highlight that, and then we go to the Movie Magic scheduling program, which is a program anyone can buy, but it's very specific to the job that we do. And you input all the information that you just broke out in order, and it creates these strips. And then those strips are you use the program to create banners and days and all that, and you because you don't, for those of you that don't know, don't know who's listening to your podcast here, we don't shoot movies linearly in order. Most of the time, they're shot out of order for various reasons, and that's the other part of an assistant director is scheduling a movie, and that's a huge art form, and a skill set to have, because it's based on a lot of variables. And it's funny, 10 or 12 years ago, it wasn't based on cast. Now everybody's so busy, your first set of variables, depending on if you're working with some of these A-list actors and stuff like that, they have 20 other things going on while they're doing your movie or your show, and so you have to schedule around them. So that's become a very big thing, and also for television. But before, it used to be about locations, what's being built on stage and what's being shot on location, and on the locations, where are they shooting? Is it a government building that you can only get to on weekends? Is it a school that you can only get to after hours? Whatever it is. I'm making stuff off the top of my head. Am I going on too much? Or?
No, I just wanted to jump in there real quick.
Sure.
And when you're in that process, I mean, 2 of the things that always throw me for a loop are stunts and VFX, because there's 5 ways to do it.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Like, for me personally, unless you don't have the time or the money, I never like to start with any big stunt sequences first, because I like to have room for a crew and a cast to get to know each other and to trust each other, and to know that they have the time to work out what they need to work out safely. Sometimes you're on those big stunt pictures and it's just stunts all the time. But I also try, and I think every AD tries, to keep it as close to linear as possible, so that there's an arc to the actors' performances that resonates with them, that they can see where that's going. But like I said, a lot of the time you're not able to do that. We actually did that on Saving Private Ryan. I didn't schedule that movie at all. That was Sergio Mimic-Kazan. But Steven wanted to shoot in order, and we did. We shot that whole movie in order, and we shot it in 59 days. Well, 60. We did one pickup reshoot day in Los Angeles at Universal on a stage, but that was shot in order. But like I said, most of them aren't. So you schedule for locations, you schedule for actors, and you schedule for the sets. So your production designer, how long is it going to take them to build what you need to build for it? Sometimes you can't have those up front and have them at the end. I remember on Jurassic World, we shot in Hawaii first, and then we came here to Louisiana, and we shot at the old Six Flags out there. And we ended up being in Louisiana in the deep summer, where it's 100, 108 degrees and all the humidity, and with outside the whole time with background on a tarmac of a parking lot, where we built the amusement park. And the reason we had to do it that way, because it would have been a lot better to start, I think in the park where the weather was better, at least, and not in the deep summer, was mainly because they didn't have enough time to build the sets. So we started in Hawaii and did all the sequences there in the rainy, jungles, more jungles. And I seem to always end up on jungle shows. I don't know why, but and then moved to Louisiana because the sets weren't built that way. But we had to scout it first, and figure it all out, then go to Hawaii and then come back and shoot. So it was a very interesting, the way that one broke down. But anyway, so you go through all these different variables, and there's, like each script calls for something different of how you would schedule it. And you get it's just a first pass. Like a schedule is a living, breathing organism. It's always going to change. I always tell everybody, don't fall in love with your first schedule. Even though you finish it and you're so excited and it's great and this is it and this is what we're going to do. It's never going to be that ever. It has life and it will always change because, when you're shooting, sometimes you don't finish your days or make your days or finish your scenes, or you determine that there's a rewrite and you need to go back or do more, and you have to be able to roll with it. So the schedule's never. You may have something that works, but it's never locked in stone. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I going back to the original question, I will not get too deep into that when I'm doing a schedule for a budget. I will basically get for the days. I'll determine, and I'll usually work with the producer, or if I'm not the unit manager, a unit manager, in discussing, there's a certain monetary value to each day of shooting for each kind of movie, and they know the general idea of what the budget's going to be. And sometimes you'll come up with a schedule and you want to make it as tight as possible. And they'll come back and they'll say, add another 6 days, add another 2 days, add another 10 days, whatever it is, or take out, conversely, take out. So I'm not scheduling for actors. I'm not scheduling for locations. I'm not scheduling for anything but a set amount of days. And that's so that they can take that if you're not doing it. And, like now I work with an accountant, so I do the budget too in the role that I'm in right now. But usually if I'm doing it for a producer, they have their people, that'll budget the script that you give them, and they'll work that out. But they'll just give you, they'll ask you how many days it is first usually, and you'll come up and you'll say it's 55 days. And they're like, yeah, we thought it around there, maybe it's 60, and you'll go through the schedule together and give them you'll tweak it, just so they can get their first pass done. And that's early scheduling, before a show's basically even greenlit. That's just to get it to that point. Did I answer your question?
No, yeah, that's good.
Okay.
But so once you're in that process, are there special things that you do differently, or that you've learned over the years in terms of, okay, we've got a big crowd sequence, or...
Yeah, well, I'll denote certain things that, I know, just from experience, I don't want to say I've been standing on sets for 32 or 33 years now, but as embarrassing as that is, you see a lot of stuff, and in your head what it takes to the basic idea of what it takes to do that. And everybody does everything differently on every show, which is what makes this business exciting, because you never know where you're going to be or what you're going to do or who you're going to work with or what their styles are. And it's, that's the interesting part of the business to me. But there's a general sense of what it takes to get something done, whether it be working with large numbers of background or in different environments. Because, for example, the show that I just did here in New Orleans is a pilot for Fox called Filthy Rich. We had a scene in a mega church, and we had, 600 people. But the scenes on D-Day, Normandy Beach and Saving Private was 1,000 soldiers, and you have to think about what does it take to get them ready, let alone what does it take to work with them and shoot this, how much time that is. So you have a general idea that, for the church scene, I can call them in the morning and get them ready and shoot all my stuff and be done. And for Saving Private Ryan, I know Sergio and Adam Goodman II, when they were, and thinking about how they were going to do this, and Kevin Delanoy, who, put the whole process together, it was more of... a bigger picture, like how much we're going to be able to shoot a day, and what's the science behind it. So you just, after a while, if you don't know, you learn by mistakes, or you ask. I've never been afraid to ask a question or call someone up and say, hey, I've never done a car movie before, and I've got this big car chase. how did you guys do it? And I'll have those conversations with people too. Not that as an example, but I mean, that's the idea behind it. So when I have a script, because we're talking so, vaguely, because like I said, every script is different. I'll look for the very, special sequences that make that script special, because otherwise it's just people talking in a room or, whatever it is that it is. And those are very easy to schedule because, you have a general idea. Every director is different. Michael Mann will do, 50 takes, but Michael Bay will do 3, or whatever. So, if you know anything about the director, that helps, but you have a general idea that if it's, if it's a 2.5 page scene, it's going to, with 3 actors or 4 actors, the more actors they have in it, the more coverage you're going to need, which in every bit of coverage, if you're only working with 2 cameras or if you have 3 cameras, is going to be a different amount of setup time if you can't shoot them all, if you can't do cross coverage. So, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's just the amount of cameras you have on set that are capturing the images and from different shots. Is how fast it takes to set it up and how fast it takes to get a print on it to move on to the next setup to complete the scene. So, I don't take any of those variables into account when I'm breaking down or budgeting or scheduling a movie. I just do a general practice of what I think it takes, having been on set all these years of, like when I'm doing it, I'm looking at it as a Jason Roberts movie.
Right.
I'm not looking at it as whoever is doing it.
The best possible product, or
you try and do it as efficiently, but you allow for room for error. You allow some variable time in different places for different things. So that's when you're coming up with what you can shoot on a day. And I mean, one of the processes when your first AD is after you make the schedule is to sit down with your director and say, hey, can you do this on this day? And then you talk about the scenes, and it may be a small scene, but he's like, no, this is the most emotional, or she, this is the most emotional part of the whole movie. And I want to take an extra 4 hours on it, and it may be, a page long, and you're like, oh, okay. But now, but that might not have been apparent to you in the beginning. Had it just been a single script page, a normal scene with 2 actors.
And when you're doing some of these larger movies, like a Michael Bay movie that has a lot of VFX, are you working with a VFX company when in the scheduling part of that film?
Well, it goes to them. I'll give you an example if I can, not using a Michael Bay movie, but I broke down and scheduled a movie for a producer that I've worked with before, Diana Picorni. We were doing a Fox movie called Call of the Wild. And I think I did the schedule in 2017 for them. And at the time, Hugh Jackman was attached, and it was this big, $100 million half kind of animated-ish movie, half live-action movie about the Jack London book with the sled dog Buck, And I had done the schedule with her and met with her and the VFX producer on that from the particular VFX company that's going to be handling the movie, and doing all this stuff, and who was like, a director on the movie, but not the director. And in the prep, I made my first schedule pass, and I went to them and they said, okay, now break out this extra stuff because that's all going to be digital. We're not even going to shoot that. And so I was able to pull strips and elements out, and get it to a leaner schedule for the actual live action part of it, and then plates that we needed to do. And we got to the point where they got it where they're happy, and the studio was like, okay, this is the movie we're going to make. And it's the funny thing, the interesting little, full circle thing here is that I went away for a year and a half or something. Maybe it was close to, I think it was the end of 2016 when I did that. Maybe it was the beginning of somewhere in the front half of 2017 when I did the schedule. And then at the last in 2018 in October, I get a phone call from her and say, hey, we're on the last 4 days of the movie right now. This is a year and a half year later. And our first CD had to leave, and nobody else knows the script like you do. Would you come in and finish the first unit for the movie? And I was like, and I was just finishing up my other job, and I talked to the studio, and they said, yeah, go help. It's Fox for Fox, I was on another Fox show. So I went over there, and I actually did the last 4 days of shooting on the movie, and it was no longer Hugh Jackman, it was Harrison Ford. It switched in the time, and but it wasn't with him. It was it was some other stuff, and I did all the the sled unit and all this other stuff that they needed to finish the last 4 days of the movie. It was kind of funny because if you break down and schedule a show for someone, and you're not doing that show, that's it. You just see it in the theaters like everybody else. But I actually had a full circle moment and got to come around and actually work on the last and run the set for the last 4 days for them on that and finish up. And that's kind of fun. It was like a little moment. Yeah.
So the VFX we're talking about how, it can be you're tag teaming with the VFX producer or the company, and
well, it's funny because like I do a show right now currently. We're have finished season 2. It's almost all being released within this month. The last episodes are released of a TV series for Fox called The Orville, Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek space kind of show, and we're going to go do season 3, and that's a heavy visual effects show. I mean, more so than most movies. We do more visual effects on that show than movies do, and it's incredible the amount. And we have a whole VFX department where we have VFX producers and supervisors and coordinators, and it's a like any movie, it's a large group of people and that are on this just like they'd be on any Marvel type movie with VFX,
right.
For a year and a half putting these episodes together. And so as a unit production manager on the movie, I mean, as an AD, when I did the first season as the first AD, and the second season I was a unit production manager, and the first season, it's more of like, this is what I want, and when you're on set and you're, this is how, I want to run it.
Right.
And then as a UPM, it's more the budgetary side of it. So you have to sit and have these wonderful meetings about what you can and can't do based on, the money you have and how you work within a budget or have to go back, hat in hand, ask for more money. And so I've had a stronger working relationship with the VFX and post teams at that point on the second season than I did the first season, because I'm busy running the set, and they're just a presence on the set to make sure we're getting them the information that they need, for the plate shots or for whatever is on in front of the camera, so that they can work with it later on. So as an AD, I think it's a different thing, but you have an understanding as an AD when you do those kind of shows, or when you've worked on Transformers. And, you deal with a lot of visual effects because there are no robots. And just like in Jurassic World, there are no dinosaurs, although we had a couple practical dinosaurs, mechanical ones. So that they were tangible, you could touch. But for the most part, they're acting off of nothing in front of them. And you get an idea of what that takes and how it is to work with that. And having a good VFX, producer or supervisor, whoever, is on the team that's with you on set, is invaluable, obviously, which is why they're there right alongside of you. But yeah, the mechanics change as the different roles that you have.
So when you're scheduling these VFX shots, I'm sorry we're talking so long about VFX, but it's something that I think is so hard to understand sometimes. So part of it from this experience of working on Transformers or working these movies, and the other part is, are you having these meetings with VFX producers and supervisors saying, how do I do this?
All the time. I mean, I don't know everything. I still don't know a lot about it. It's like I didn't, it's not my forte. It's not my, the science behind it. I'm just like everybody else. I'm like, what? How are you going to do that? Okay. But the one thing I do is have access for them to show me what they're talking about. And I also have the ability to, be humble and say, I still don't understand, explain it to me in layman's terms so I understand what we're doing, because, listen, some of it is above me, but, you have to be strong enough to be able to keep asking the questions until you understand it, or trust the people that you hire in those particular roles to tell you this is what it takes, and you have to know when it's like, okay, that's what we're going to do, that's the best way to do it. And I come more from that latter school too, where you surround yourself with very good people that are very good at what they do, and you give them a little bit of room, to do the job that they are well qualified and trained to do.
Right. So you're done with the schedule. It's amazing. You think it's great, and you're moving into pre-production. And how much time do you normally prep a movie for, or a TV series?
Once again, we're talking in vague variables,
right,
because every show is different. So, I mean, a movie like Jurassic World is going to have, 20 weeks or more, 30 weeks, it just depends. Like Avengers, Chris Castaldi, the AD on that, I know he was prepping, so many months out. It was, it was incredible. That was, 2.5 years of his life or more, because I think they're still doing some reshoots, or just finishing that up. So, I mean, a smaller movie, like if it's more what I call just a talking head kind of movie where it's not the big stunts and effects. I mean, if it's an independent low budget movie, you may only get, 4 weeks or 5 weeks, But if you're looking at your average studio picture, I don't know, the variables go from 10 to 16 weeks, I don't know.
And so
TV is different though.
Right.
TV, I mean, when you're getting set up for the season,
mm-hmm.
it's a little more time, but for every episode that you shoot, you're getting 8 days of prep as an AD, as someone who's scheduling it. If you're the first AD in on the first episode and you're prepping up, you probably get, 14 days maybe, on the first one out there. And the UPM and the rest of the production team will have, 8 to 10 weeks out, or more, depending on how complicated the set builds are or, what you need to do. I mean, it's hard to give general answers because every single show and every single type of show is different. But, it's you have to so you finish scheduling. Let's say the movie's greenlit and you're good and you're the AD and you're doing the movie with the director. You have to then figure out the real schedule now, which is how are we going to shoot this, where we want to shoot this and the time that we have to shoot this in. And so whatever I said that would be, if it's 10 weeks out or 16 weeks out or 12 weeks out, whatever it is, you have to start, you're meeting every day with all the departments, with the production designer, with the cinematographer when they come on, or even if they're not on, having these conversations, definitely with the director and the location manager. You're scouting a lot and you're determining where the sets are going to be. So you understand where they need to fit within the schedule. And, and the production designer is obviously heavily involved in one of the key decision, people in that, triangle. So, all those meetings that you have all day long are just things that lead up to how you're going to put the puzzle together. So
when you're in that process, is there a certain type of system or thing that you're trying to do? Like, are you trying to create a rhythm each week? Okay, on Monday we're going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a flow to everything, and so I think I tapped on it briefly with the one comment earlier where I said I don't like to schedule big stunts or big sequences or big emotional moments too early in a schedule. I mean, sometimes you don't have a choice, but and my other through line goal is to keep it as in close to linear arc as I can, because it's always helpful to do that. Impossible to do that, but as close as you can. And sometimes you can't because the location will be in the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie, and you're only at the location once, so you're going to be
right.
shooting that at the same time, or whatever it may be in that case. But there's a definite energy and there's a definite idea, and it's funny because you'll go through it with the director and you'll get this rhythm of how much you can shoot on a day and how much of that is emotional content, of a scene between two actors or whatever, and how much is going to be the action of running down the hall, and can that be a BK, whatever that is. You'll come up with a schedule, and then they'll start casting, because usually they don't have everyone cast there, and all of a sudden they get I don't know, Julia Roberts, and all of a sudden she's not available in November from these dates, and that's the only way your schedule worked, was to have those scenes on that dates. And then you have to sit and you go back to square one and change everything around again, and you have to have all your meetings again and figure out what the art department can do to accelerate building something, or finding a new location, or recasting a different actor if you want to keep that actor because that other actor isn't available on those days, or whatever it is. I mean, There's literally thousands of variables, and so that's the idea behind it. It's hard to talk specifically about it, but you have to be able to be a reed, that blows in the wind and absorbs everything that's coming at you, and not be a very rigid, stringent person, and because that'll snap in hard when, you know what I mean? You have to be able to be fluid with it. So did I answer that? I don't know.
No, I think you did.
Okay.
Well, I guess I was curious also about your prep process, if there's anything specifically that that you like to do as Jason Roberts during prep on a movie,
Well, I mean, I don't think anything out of I do, it depends on what the job is. When I used to be a second AD before moving up, I'd hire my team, and I like to, and this is just something off the side, if any of the guys that have worked with me in the past, or at least far enough in the past that remember this, I would take everybody out for a dinner, and get a little bonding experience. I used to screen that documentary More Than a Game. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
About LeBron James. Not because it's LeBron James and, he because of who he is, but I liked the message behind that documentary, which is about teamwork and loyalty with him and his friends. And I would screen that. And it's a good documentary nonetheless. And I just let it sink into my group of guys or girls, as a team, because it exemplifies that, and when you're out there, it's you're the unit, it's a battle, and
right.
and you got to rely on everybody else, and I think stuff like that helps. But in doing a movie, I like to be very just dedicated to getting the job done every day, which is whatever that calls for that day. I don't rule with an iron fist when I was an AD. I wasn't a yeller or a screamer, and some people do operate like that, and I didn't find that serviced me or anybody else very well. Right. So I wasn't that kind of guy, and I always try to give people room, and kind of guide with a light touch and a sense of humor, and maybe a little bit of charisma. I don't know, But I think that, everyone has a different style, and you try and find, the teams of people that you work with, that match your style, or at least can adapt to your style. And as a first AD, at least. As a second, I had to adapt to the first, to the best of my abilities. It's a little bit of a chameleon kind of role,
right.
being the key second AD versus the first AD. And as a UPM, you have to let it go, and you have to let people hire their teams that they want, provided that they're qualified and they can make the deal. And then you have to give them room to succeed or fail in their particular departments. And, you can still guide, and you can still be, that angel on their shoulder to help where needed, but you have to give them room to do things the way that you can't micromanage that much, because it's soul killing, and it's not the reason that you have those people there, is my thought. And I don't like to baby actors, and I don't like to treat, people with, reverence. I just like to respect everybody and respect the job. So I think it's pretty clear, when I was the second, and this is how I learned from the first ADs, the guys like Castaldi and the other ADs I worked with, there was no mistaking who's in charge. He's in charge. And I like to take that same thing when I was a first, that I may be easygoing and have a sense of humor and all that, but there was no mistaking that I had a game plan, and this is how we're doing it, and this is what's happening. And either you're in or you're in the way. So, you know what I mean? There's that level of like the professionalism and the seriousness of like you have a group of 300 people or 250 people that you're responsible for their health, welfare, safety, and general well-being, while trying to, push forward the shooting movement, of a company, at the same time, and keep it on budget, within your schedule. So there's a lot of, things going on in your head, the mechanics behind it that you're always, adjusting for. It's almost like remember Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator when he first landed in the glasses, and someone says something and like the 6 different responses come up in his eyeball and the red, and he picks one of them. And that's kind of what it's like, as everything's happening, you're rolling with it and figuring out what it is. So, right. But you were very specific about prep, and, prep is, the 5 P's, prep, it's because if or is it 4 P's? Prep is so you don't have piss poor planning, and procedure. I don't remember what it was, but it's something like that, where if you don't prep properly, it's not going to get executed properly. So you have to put in, I keep saying the work because I don't know the specifics of what I'm saying as far as like every day is different, and every kind of meeting is different, but you have to unite the crew so that they're all on the same page as the director, as you're helping the director achieve his vision. So, the director will say something, and it's your job to manage it and marshal everybody together to execute that vision for a feature, and television, it's a little bit different. The director comes in, does have his or her version of what they're doing, but it's a producer's medium. These writer, producer, showrunners, have certain styles, and as an AD, you have to, if it's a guest director, you have to be the little bird in there and say, hey, we don't use Dutch angles on this show, or whatever it is, right. Or we don't use Steadicam, let's figure out another way to do it. I had a director who will remain nameless on Orville during the first season, who wanted to, get a big techno crane on the side of a mountain, with all this stuff. And I was just like, and he did a lot of Game of Thrones. And I was like, this isn't Game of Thrones. This is not how we work here. I'll tell you what, I'll get you a dolly track and a jib arm up there, and we'll schedule it for the end of the day. But it's not going to be, we're not going to helicopter in here, to do that. So, what the heart of the show is and what the tone of the show is. And same for the movie. And who you're working for and trying to get that, idea across to everybody heading in the same direction. As ADs, we facilitate the forward movement of a shooting company, and it's our job to do that with a lot of different personalities. And it's a complicated job, otherwise a lot of people would be doing it.
When you're mentioning this idea of work, which I really like that concept, where it's, I find sometimes people are afraid of the hard work of actual filmmaking, that they're fascinated with this idea of being in a movie.
I always tell people that the movie business is glamorous until you're in it.
Right.
And then from that moment on, it's work, because you have to find it within yourself. You have to find it within your own heart I can't tell you. I was just talking to my wife about this yesterday. We were just talking about some of the old shows, and she says, I don't know how you, in Cambodia, I did that Angelina Jolie picture, First They Killed My Father, and we shot for several months in the jungles and the rice fields, and in no real huge civilized kind of areas. It was all rural, and it was we had, in a 55-day shoot, we had 25,000 background artists, and none of them spoke English, and none of them ever worked on a show before. So the complicated prep period of setting that up, with the AD team was very interesting. But so we had to work weekends, and we had to rehearse with all the people on the weekends for everything we were going to do during that week. And we had a great AD team. I'll tell you all about them later. But we had a very solid group of people from around the world that we brought in to do this. And every day, 7 days a week, 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm getting up. I'm putting on, my long sleeve shirts and my long sleeve pants in 108 degrees in the jungles, and my hats and my scarves and stuff, because the sun is brutal, and it's like Lawrence of Arabia. It actually cools you down more that way, and you don't get sunburnt or dehydrated as easy. And my wife would watch me trudge out of the hotel room every morning, not knowing how I'm doing it for, and I would just go. And but my mindset is, once I set foot in either the van or the car taking me there, I actually drove in with the first, so we always had our driver, and we'd get to set. I'd step onto the set, and I'd be like, this is my whole life now. The only thing that matters is making sure everything runs smoothly to get what we need to get done today. And whether that was a weekend of rehearsing, or whether that was, whatever it meant to getting stuff ready for the next day, whatever that was, I just shut everything else out. It's like Kobe Bryant on the basketball court. No, he doesn't notice any of the people around him, the fans, or anything screaming or anything. All he knows is the basketball and the hoop, and it's the same kind of idea for when I do it. And every day for those months, and sometimes shows back to back where I would just push myself. And when you think you can't go anymore, you find that place within you to go further. And that's what separates a lot of people who are like, that's not for me, or that's not what I want to do. But I saw a longer, bigger term picture for me in this business. And I knew it would take that kind of work, because there's 100 other people, there's 1,000 other people that do what I do. Some of them a lot better than me, some not so good as me, maybe I'm somewhere in the middle, but I knew that the one thing that might set me apart from everybody else is my work ethic and my dedication, and the fact that I won't give up until it gets done. And I think that appealed to a lot of different producers and directors and ADs, where I started to get a lot of phone calls because they knew they could trust me, and that it would just get done no matter what it was. And so it's you have to individually find it within yourself. It's a strong work ethic is a strong part of it.
You mentioned dealing with thousands of extras. I think that's something that I'm always curious about on some of these larger shows that shoot overseas. What's the process for sourcing them? Are you paying them? Are they volunteers?
No, you pay everybody. Well, I guess certain shows may or may not. If you remember Gandhi, the story, and I just blinked out on the first name. He was incredible. I know Julian Wall was one of the seconds on it, but there's the famous story where Sir Richard Attenborough, and it wasn't David Tomlin. I'm so blanking. I might make you shut this off, and I'll go look it up really quick, and then come back with it. But anyways, he was so nervous about this day because they had 250,000 background. Now you're not paying everybody, but that was the number. That's, I think, the largest number ever. 200. And you didn't hear that wrong. It was 250,000 background artists. And I remember the story being told to me by another AD who was that I worked with, who was working with all those guys at the time, and the story, and I think it's been told many times to many different people, but there's still people around who were there. I was so nervous about this day with 250,000 background, and they had all these telephone poles with big speakers set up all the way across town for miles. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. And I did a scene on that Angelina Jolie movie with 10,000 background on one day, and that was a lot, and I couldn't imagine 250,000.
Oh my gosh.
You know, that was like 25 times. It's incredible. So he's so nervous about it, and he's talking to him for 20 minutes about that, and he says, "Do you understand?" He goes, "Yeah." And he grabs the microphone and he goes, "Right, Gandhi's dead, you're sad." You know, and then that was it. That was the 4 words that he said, or something like that. You know, Gandhi's dead, you're sad. After 20 minutes of hearing how important it is to get the message across to everybody. So sometimes you need to, to be able to work with large amounts of people, you can't get too deep into things. When some of the harder background is set is when you have 1 or 2 people, and that's very specific stuff. When you have large numbers of people, there's there's an art and mechanics to that too, where, you'll see some people come by and, do it via, split people up via their birthdays or birthday months, or if their last number of their social security ends on an even number or an odd number. It's a really quick way to split people up and send them in different directions doing certain things, or to put people in little battalion groups and units and have them all, go on the same general mission in life, or have somebody, speed, everyone whose name starts with a J goes 10% faster than everybody else in the scene. You know what I mean? Whatever that is, there's like lots of little tricks that you learn along the way to help you. And sometimes you just wing it, and, I like to, when you're an AD, breaking down, can I go backwards for a second here? Breaking down and scheduling a movie, and you're in the actual part where you're, the movie's, being made, and you're with the director, and you're 4 weeks out, and you're going over the background. You usually have another meeting where you sit down and you say, well, in this scene, when the guy drops his son off at his grandmother's house, the director will tell you, say, I pictured that there'd be 2 other cars on the street, maybe some kids on a bicycle, maybe a mailman, somebody watering the lawn, and whatever. And the director say, no, I don't want the kids on the bicycle because of whatever reason, but I do want more cars because I want it to seem like she lives in a busy area, or I want it to be like, a lot more people on the street, or nobody on the street. I just want it to be an empty street, and you have these conversations about every scene of like, when I'm doing it, my breakdown, it's still that Jason Roberts movie, it's not whoever the director is, he or she is, their movie yet. And when I sit down and go over it with them, it becomes, what their vision and how I can, adapt or change. And I give them, a general idea, or they'll come to me and they'll say already what they want, depending on what it is. But the same thing, when you're working with large amounts of background, you have to break it into smaller groups usually to work it out. And so, it depends on, what your role is on the AD team, because primarily the key second ADs aren't setting the background, and when I was a second, I was, you're right next to the first, and you're, I'm still on the set as much as possible as a second, but the business has changed a lot in the last several years, where being a key second AD, you were more like an assistant unit manager. I made deals all the time as an AD. I've done some really unusual things as a second AD that you wouldn't think would be in the job description, but yet are, I think more and more standard these days, in the sense of, you still have a chain of command that you need to go through to get to where you need to go, but you're sometimes at the first line of defense of handling things. And that didn't always used to be the case, but going backwards just to the background part of it, because I'll get off on a tangent. It's your second and additional seconds and PAs or whoever, the trainees that are the ones that are setting and directing the background on a set. And for those of you that are listening to this that may not be in the business and know what that is, the assistant director, one of the creative parts of the job is that everything that's not an actor being directed by the director is directed by an assistant director. And so whether it's cars in the background or people, we paint with people and we create believable atmosphere, so you don't realize that they're, it's not the Truman Show, where all of a sudden everybody stops and he realizes he's in a show and not, in his real life. So if you do it well, it's seamless, and there's tricks to that too, where, we all, the standard way of directing background is you give them their background cue ahead of time. 99% of the time is there's specific cues not to do that, so that their action is happening and the actors walk into it, so that there's no frozen people in a scene, and that there's a believable world that they're currently in, But there's you watch the Truman Show and you'll see what I'm talking about.
And in that movie that you were dealing with thousands of extras, what was the process of finding those extras?
Oh, well, so there's a J.P. Vandermeer is a background casting director based out of Cape Town, South Africa, or Johannesburg. No, Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done movies like the new Mad Max, and he's doing a Ridley Scott movie right now. I mean, his forte is to going to foreign countries and getting background. So what he did, I got there slightly ahead of the first AD to prep in Cambodia because they had actually replaced the other AD team, and I sat down and we were putting everything together, and Adam came in, and we had to get someone like that in because he needed to go to every village area that we were shooting in and recruit all these people to do the movie. Now, we were paying everybody. It's not the same in a first world country than it is in a third world country, but they were all being compensated more than they would normally make ever there, so it was all something that was beneficial to them and beneficial to us. And so I remember one instance, he's such a lovely guy and he's got such a great heart. We needed to get some monks, and it was very difficult to film with monks because they can't always work within your schedule, and they can't always do what you want them to do. And so sometimes we had to cast people that weren't monks, and that meant shaving their head, because they had to do that. And he was the first guy to get a whole bunch of people together, stand in line at the barber first, and shaved his head to show everybody else.
Wow.
He's a dedicated guy. He's such a lovely guy, and he's so good at what he does. I would hire him on any show. But he would go and figure out with the locations department how to get buses to each town that they were shooting in the area. And when we were shooting the stuff, that particular thing, he'd find the 500 people in the local villages,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the people that would work in the background in those areas. He would get them on buses and get them to our costume department so Ellen Mirajnik could fit everybody, and put them in certain clothes, because it wasn't all just pajamas and, soldier uniforms and stuff like that. It had to be pre-fit. So we did most that we could do there, and then, we sent people out to them to, work with that. For the 10,000 background day, we had people come as they were, because you're not going to dress 10,000 people. But it was a general idea of what they were going to wear, what's going to work within what we wanted to, it was a period picture, but it worked because it was just the large numbers. But having a great background casting director on these foreign locations is different than like central casting, sitting in an office and making phone calls. It takes a lot more. You have a large team of people, and it takes a lot more. You have to go out and photograph everybody. You have to go and explain everything. So they have usually like these, in a way, they're almost like tribal elders or village elders, that
Mm-hmm.
would then, they're like the platoon leaders that would get the 30 people from their little village, and then they would be there on the day, and you'd pay them, and, you'd work it out that way. And what we did is so we had a lot of ADs from all over the world. I had a couple from the States, a couple from the UK, some from Berlin, some from Australia, some from the Czech Republic. I mean, we brought people in from everywhere that had very specific skill sets and had worked with myself and Adam Sumner on different shows around the world that we trusted, and brought them in. And what I did is, in the beginning, is I found there wasn't really a film community that was very deep in Cambodia. So, but in Phnom Penh, we were in Siem Reap. We were able to find, like, I want to say film students, but students and people that had been making like short films and stuff like that spoke English, and I recruited them and had people recruit them to come up to Siem Reap. We put them up in hotels, and we paid them a good salary, and we turned those people into production assistants, third ADs, the second AD,
Right.
And everybody had we had a large number of them, and they would be our translators, and they would be right by our side. And like, I did this in India. I did a movie in India, and I had someone that was like that for me in India. And I've done a few movies in South America, and it's almost the same thing, where I pick that one person that's like-minded, like the ones I just told you about, and I will talk to large groups of background in English. I'd learn a little bit of like Hindi, let's say, but not enough to be able to
Mm-hmm.
communicate what I wanted to communicate, and they would be right next to me, and I would tell them in the beginning, I said, you need to repeat everything I'm saying word for word in your language with the same cadence and the same intonation and the same emphasis, so that what I'm saying means the same to them, so that they can do the action that I want them to do. And finding good people like that is invaluable, in making that happen. And so you have to figure that out. You know what I mean? I did a movie in Uruguay, and there's nobody had ever done a movie in Uruguay before. They had brought, like, I think Michael Mann's Miami Vice had shot there, but they brought everybody from Miami, you know, and from America. So there wasn't one local person that worked in Uruguay on movies. And when we put the crew together, there was a couple of people that they do commercials down there, but they'd never done a movie. I had to show the prop guy, here's what your job is. You know, I had to show art department people, here's what your job is. I was there prepping for a long period of time, and you had to train the different departments to do what they do. And sometimes those distant location jobs, you're showing people what to do.
Are you, when you're dealing with that many extras that are kind of in a foreign world, are you paying them like in their monetary?
So like they get paid in their local currency, and so like every background artist got not the 10,000 people. We didn't pay them. That was that we paid their soldiers that we had within the group of the 10,000 of that day. Maybe it's more like 11,000, you know, because we had probably 800 soldiers and child soldiers and stuff. Is crazy. But so we'd pay those people, but you know, the people you would pay every other background artist just like you would in any other country, you know, a living working wage. You know, for example, I believe we paid the Cambodian background in these small villages. I believe we paid them anywhere from $12 to $15 a day, and we gave them food, you know, for lunch and stuff like that, and that was more and they would each group would be shooting in these different areas for a couple weeks at a time, so every day that they would be there they get another $12 or $15. And I think someone told me, and I may be wrong, but this is what I was told, that by the time we leave every 2 or 3 weeks to the next location, in that 3-week period, those $15 a day for 3 weeks, you know, that the 15 days of $15 was more than they would make in 2 years.
Oh wow.
So it was not a large sum if you think in first world terms, but in third world terms, it was like, and Angie actually was concerned that they would get too much money too quickly. And so she wanted to get financial planners to go from the cities to go to the villages to help them, you know, not spend their money on, you know, stuff that wasn't helpful for them. You know, she could do whatever they want, but just so that they didn't, you know,
so they might save it. And
yes, they know how to save it and use it for the benefit for them. I mean, she is a definite woman of the people. I love her, but she was so kind-hearted to everyone there.
I'm sorry to ask this again, but is this money like just in their currency? Or
yeah,
you're not
in their
them through
currency.
Payroll though.
No. You have a chit. They just sign
Right.
a thing to the and they get paid that. It gets directly to them though. It's not put in a bank for them. It's
Right.
handed to them. That's what it is.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And JP, the casting director, is the one who gets it to them directly.
So, and then
I'm just curious. Was there a reason you're like?
No. I'm just curious. I mean, sometimes though, on some of these bigger movies, I'm always curious if it's just okay. We're putting a sign here, and whoever walks by.
Well, there is that. There's always that when you're shooting in cities and buildings and stuff like that, you
Right.
know. And there's a sign up that says we're filming here, and if you walk through here, you give your consent to be filmed and give up your rights to your likeness, you know, in perpetuity for whatever we shoot here. There's that, but there's, you know, that's rare that you're not going to supplement that with real background, you know, in a scene. You know, if you're walking down, you know, and it's Saturday Night Fever and you're in New York City, you're not paying every single person on the street, you know, whatever the money is there, you know, in that example, but you will have, you know, your X amount of background artists, whether it's 100 or 50 or whatever it is that you manipulate through the scenes, you know.
So they'll be close to the main actor.
Yeah, or they'll be on the certain path that the actor knows he's walking through, you know.
Right.
And yeah.
I was just curious, sometimes it's how do you figure out, okay, this scene we're going to do CG extras, this scene we're going to do a big crowd and we're going to pay them, or...
Well, it's you know, back in the day, you used to do inflatable people in the stadiums. You know, I never know, you know about this or anything, you know, or you'd have like the cardboard cutouts, you know, and everything. And it was before the awesome visual effects that we have now. You know, it was easier. There's a whole company called Blow Up People or I can't remember the name of it. It was like, yeah, and they would come in and it would cost X amount of dollars for every person they put in on a wig and a wardrobe with dress tops only because there's no legs. They're sitting in stadium seats. But I'll give you an example. On this last pilot we did, we were in this mega church and we had our 550, 600 people, and that church seats 4,000. So we were talking about visual effects, about, you know, tiling people is what it's called.
Right.
And people can look that up, and you know, to get a deep conversation about tiling. But you would move groups of people around, photograph them in different various configurations, and then the visual effects guys would be able to take those shots and move them into different places in the pieces of the pie or the wedge of the stadium or theater or church, as it were, for this particular pilot. But the ADs were and the director were so good on this one that they took those 550 people and we had 3 cameras going, and they managed to get them in every single shot. So, and mixed up for every single shot that we did, that I think we only ended up needing to do visual effects in 1 shot in the deep background. So that was a huge savings, and made me, bow down to the, greatness of that AD team and that director, because it certainly saved us a lot of money.
Yeah, I think I did a similar shot in Megachurch, and we hired like 300 extras, and I ended up getting a VFX company to put a LiDAR.
LiDAR.
In the middle of the stage, and it kind of captured the room.
Yeah.
So
for what people who are listening to this, if they don't know what LiDAR is,
yeah.
the exact initials it stands for, I couldn't tell you. But basically, they're photographing and mapping the room, on a computer system, and they have photographs of it and on a computer system, so that when they get these images of these people in different groups, they're able to place them in any kind of configuration they want to. In this particular example, but unless you can tell me,
No, I think that's all I know. I mean, to me, I think when you dealing with hundreds or thousands of extras, it's one of those fascinating movie making things that I think general people don't know. How did you do that?
The 10 Commandments, you remember where Cecil B. DeMille was doing the same thing like Gandhi. He probably had I think 100,000 background or something like that, and he had 11 cameras going, and there's that famous joke story where they're like, okay, they're rolling and they cut, and camera 1, did you get it? Got it, CB. Camera 2, did you get it? And then camera 10 says, ready whenever you are, CB. That kind of thing. There's with large groups, you can't control everything. You do your best, and as long as you set up for the best possible safety and the best possible results for the shots that you've pre-planned out, I think, that's, you go at a certain point, you go with it. I remember, we had 1,000 people in the park in Jurassic World, and for the part of getting them ready and the heat and all the other stuff, I had to think about how do I keep these people comfortable? How do I keep these people safe? And, and what does that mean? And I was worried about heat stroke and heat exhaustion, because you're outside. Like I said, it was about 108 degrees. Mm-hmm. It was probably August, maybe end of July, beginning of August when we were shooting that. And it was just direct sun all day long for these people who didn't have a lot of protection from it. So, you have to do everything. I had 5 ambulances on standby. I was worried about that, but I had these barrel misters. I had lots of water for everybody, bottles and whatnot. I had a whole team of like air conditioning people. Like it was funny. I was putting together my PA team, and we were in Hawaii, and I brought out 2 second ADs to start prepping for me about a month and a half ahead in New Orleans while we were still in Hawaii, and put everything together. And every day they'd call me and say, get PAs for this, get PAs for that. And originally, we were thinking we could get by with 10 PAs. And I think by the end of, us coming there and figuring out what we needed to put something together, I had a staff of 32, which is pretty big. But, those 32 people are taking care of 1,000 people.
Right.
In as far as their health and welfare, and locking up, and so they don't go places that are unsafe, or cueing them so they can hear everything. We had a voice of God system set up, so that wasn't mainly the problem. But it took that little army of getting them ready and getting them safely on set. It took that. That's what it took. Mm-hmm. In that environment. So
you're talking about your AD staff. When it comes to starting a project, how do you go about finding your team, as
a second, first, or UPM or producer?
Well, pick maybe a first AD. Let's say a first AD.
Well, in finding my second.
Second or second seconds. Or,
well, it's funny because all any AD really wants is to have a team that they are part of. You know what I mean? That like I said earlier, like-minded people that work well together, because that's the biggest benefit to you, is if you have a regular group of people that understand each other in shorthand in order to get things done efficiently and safely. It's like I always say. So as a first, I would hire people I've worked with before, for the most part, people that I trusted, people that I thought were smart and as driven as I was, or as tenacious as I was when I was in those positions. And because I really think like a second AD should be thinking like a key should be thinking like a first, and a first should be thinking like a director. You're not doing those jobs, but if you're thinking like them, it allows you that room to be able to have the communication upwards, with those people above you, while still doing, your A-list job, your best job of the job you're hired for. And so, like I said, there's a little level of like, as a second AD, I hired everybody. As a first AD, I hired the second, and then we'd meet the second, because I think as a first AD, that second standing next to you on set, and whoever that girl or guy is, you want to be able to have a good rapport with them, because otherwise it's going to be a long show, or it's not going to be a long show for them. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but past that, you leave your team to hire the people and hope that they get the right people in the right job. And all I like to do as a first is stop in and say hello and welcome to the team sort of thing. Because like I said, I hire the people I trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust them to hire the right people. And if somebody isn't working out, we don't mess around with it. It's just, that's it. We'll just get a new person, and that's top to bottom, of the thing. So, and then there's some shows where, there's some, if you have a couple seconds that you work with as a first, you may want to mix up the team a little differently because of who the director is, who the producers are, what the nature of the show is. You might find that somebody's stronger, in one way than another. And so that might inform you a little bit to go a different way. Or if you're in a new place where you're not bringing someone with you, I don't think ADs are very good at interviewing. I like to think I am, because I actually interview someone. I don't just say, oh, you worked on this, what was that like?
Right.
Which is as a second, I had that a lot of the time, because, some of it is like, you want to know, can you work 5 days or 6 days a week, 12 hours a day with this person? And you want to know that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is, what is their skill set, and how do they react, and how do they handle themselves in crisis and in, calm times. So, I myself have like pretty deep conversations in my interviews, and it's funny, there's a first AD, really great guy, George Bamber, who I was helping him put his team together for a show I wasn't even doing, but for whatever circumstances, I was helping him interview his team. And he had a great thing. It was almost like a Vanity Fair back page question at the end of everything. And I really loved this. And I actually it took it from him, and I'll tell you guys what it is and it could be anything, but his particular one was, and he would preface it by saying, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but I want you just to tell me what comes to your head, and I want you to honestly tell me how, an answer to this. He says, if you could be any kind of tree you could be, what would you be and why? And out of all the people we interviewed, probably like 15 people that day, not one person came up with the same kind of tree or the reason that they were that tree. And I ended up seeing these people and working with some of these people later on, and it was that characteristic that they described was so true of who they were.
Oh, wow.
It was really amazing. And so thank you, George Bamber, for that, because I kind of ask a question like that, if not that direct one too, So
yeah, sometimes
don't ask me what kind of tree I'd be, though, because I'm not going to do that on a podcast.
Sometimes the interviews, I've been in are just kind of anticlimactic. Like, here's the job, and Bubba's like, well, do you want to know anything about me?
Well, it's funny. That's true. Like Joel, I told you this morning, when I walked in here, that I was out golfing with Joel Nishimini, who's is a great first AD, and he's been working with me a lot on my shows, and I used to work for him as his second, and I went to interview with him on a movie. A UPM producer called me in to meet with him. He didn't have a second, and it was for an Orlando Bloom movie called The Good Doctor. It was a small movie, and I walked in the room and I handed him my resume, and he put it down, and he goes, Samson says you're good, and I said, well, I don't know, I've been doing it a long time, and he goes, okay, and I said, well, I said, do you want to talk to me about the show or anything? And he goes, no, and he said, I said, do you have any questions for me? And I started talking about it, and he goes, do you want the job? And I said, yeah. And he goes, okay, you got the job. And I said, that's it? And he goes, that's it. And I said, well, how do you know? And he goes, I can tell. I got a vibe right now. You walk in, I could tell. I don't need to know anymore. You're doing what you're doing because you know what to do. So I'm not worried about your skill level. I just wanted to look at you. I wanted to know that eye to eye, look you in the eyes and see that you're the guy that's going to be able to do the job for me. I was like, okay. So I had like 5 words with him. I mean, it felt like 5 sentences, and we ended up working together several times, based on that. So he was right. I'm just joking. I don't know. He's good.
So, talking about working on set, working long hours, you can sometimes work with somebody that is difficult to work with, or there's, you know, situations escalated. How do you go about de-escalating a situation, or calming people down, or getting things to come back to be level?
I could give you a specific story that would, but I don't think I'm allowed to. I think legally I can't say it on the air. It's interesting because I think the kind of people that ADs become, like I used to say earlier in the podcast, I said we're like bartenders. We're also like, school teachers, and we're also like, chicken herders. Do we need to stop it? Okay. We're also, we wear many hats, and I think one of the things that is great about being an AD, and that I've found in a similar trait in most of the ADs that I've worked with, is that, for the most part, I won't say everybody, is that we're people persons. We're very comfortable talking to people. We're very comfortable listening to people. And I think listening is a very key component of understanding situations. I have a couple mantras I live by, and one of them is a 2-word mantra. It's very simple. It's gain perspective. So, and the other one, just to finish it off and then go backwards for a second, is be kind, for every soul you meet is engaged in a great battle, because you don't know what's going on within anyone. I don't know when you show up on a set if your brother just died. I don't know if, your son just graduated in high school and got into the college you wanted to. I don't know anything about your life past what you share with me, or if I've worked with you before. And every day I have 250 people, some of them the same and some new, every day on set. And as a matter of fact, being an assistant director, we're the only department that works with people that may have never been on set before and have to direct them to do action on set. Having never been in the business before, and these are the kind of people you have to work with. So you have 250 different personalities, and you have to know how to work within that. And I think most ADs have a very calm sense about them. I think, in times of crisis or escalated things, they're the people. Everyone looks to the first assistant director to give direction and to lead. I mean, any good one they do, at least. And I think there's instances where it's easy to let people say what they have to say in whatever way they want to say it, and have them take a breath and step back from and get the perspective of whatever the situation is. I think you need to be a chameleon, and you need to adapt to different people. So, sometimes sometimes, I just want to hear people say, copy that. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to be heard, in my own personal life, like, I don't want to have a discussion about it. I don't want to, whatever it is. I just want people to say, copy that. I'm going to execute the plans you just gave me, not, and without any discussion. And there's a lot of time, that comes up with everybody. And so sometimes people get backed into corners, or get put into situations where they didn't think they would be in that situation, or put in that corner, or feel like they're being disregarded, which is a huge thing. I mean, tone plays a huge part of it, but you remind people, however you do it, whatever your tricks are, that you're all working towards the same common goal, which is servicing the movie. I'm there for the movie. I'm there for the director. I'm there for the movie. I'm there for the studio. I'm there to make it happen. And so, in facilitating that forward movement of everybody, sometimes you get people that just need to be heard, or just need their question answered. And when you disregard them, or don't listen to them, or don't hear their questions, then that's what escalates. So, if it gets to that point, you just need to get to a point where you can either get to the point where you can do that for them, or you need to remove them from the situation. And sometimes you can't if it's certain people, and you just need to let it play out a little bit, as long as it's not compromising the movie or the safety of people in the movie. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think, I've been in situations where it's, how long is it going to take for this actor to be done in makeup? And the makeup artist gets upset because you asked them that question. So it's how do you...
Well, let's use that as a very specific example. When I was running Basecamp, and that's, for those of you that don't know what that is, that's the production person that's in charge of getting the actors through hair, makeup, and wardrobe, and getting them to the set on time, ready to go. And so if you're the Basecamp PA or the Basecamp AD or the Basecamp trainee, whatever it is on your show. There's a way where you have a first aid, you're the eyes and ears of the first AD in Basecamp because they're not there. Sometimes you're miles away. Sometimes this is over a phone, and they got to get in a shuttle and get there. And you're the only link. And so when you're not in communication to whatever degree, whether it's with the second or the first or someone on set, and they're waiting, that can get very tense. Sometimes, and I always tell my team this ahead of time, I'll like to make a show in front of the director because the director might be the one who's impatient, and you're like, hey, get these people, so they see you doing something. But in reality, you know it's going to take what it's going to take, and you just want them to be able to bring their level down, that way. Other times, when I was on the receiving end of a Basecamp thing, being asked every 5 minutes, are they ready yet? Are they ready yet? Are they ready yet? I would only ask every 10th time, because if a makeup artist tells me it's going to take 20 minutes, and every time you interrupt me, it's going to add 3 minutes to it, or whatever it is, I'm not going to interrupt every 20 minutes. I will check in every, if it's getting down there, say, hey, they just said camera's now ready, or make up whatever excuse,
Right.
or just say they're going to move on to something else unless you can give a very accurate time of what it is. There's different ways of, you usually as a Basecamp person, you have your strong bonds with not just the talent, the actors, but with the hair and makeup and wardrobe people, which you also have to consider as creative, first team people too. And they're artists, they don't like to be rushed, but sometimes you have to tell them when they need to be rushed, They have to still follow the game plan, I don't know, once again, if I answered that.
No, I think it's good.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, it's 2019, we're kind of in a modern time period. What type of technology or software do you like to use or have used recently that's helped you in the films you worked on?
Well, I mean, as a unit production manager and producer, I'm, still using Movie Magic budgeting and scheduling, and I use Excel. But, I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I like to turn pages in a book. I don't like to read those online, but my phone is as I'm moving up the chain, so to speak, the phone has become a primary function tool for me, because as a UPM and as a producer, it's all about the conversations that I'm having with people and kind of to keep them on budget, or, trying to solve the problems that you don't realize are coming up. So I'll give an example. Like as a first AD, I might go to the UPM and the director says, well, it's a TV show, and say, hey, we need, they wrote 10 elephants in this scene, on Monday, I need those 10 elephants, and this is a week away. And the UPM and the producer may say, well, we don't have a budget for 10 elephants. We know it's in the script. We can get you 6, whatever you come up with, right? And then as a first AD, you go away. You tell the director, we got 6 of them coming. Don't worry about it. It's the one you want with the big ear. Yeah, you got that elephant. Don't worry. And then you go to set, and on Monday when you show up, there's 6 elephants there. That's all you think. And then you shoot your day with those elephants, and then you go home and, you move to the next location, and you don't think about it anymore. And as the UPM, I'm sitting there and say, okay, A, where am I getting these elephants? Who's training the elephants? Who's taking care of them? How am I getting them here? Who's going to clean up after them? Who's going to feed them? Where do they have to be? And all the 100 things that go with a first aid that just says, I need elephants. It's a whole different world that you don't realize. And you learn a whole part of the crew that any AD listening to this, I promise you, I guarantee 100% that you have no idea who your rigging crews are. You have no idea who these people are that keep the show running. They're like the people, at night, the put everything together so you show up and you can do everything. And as a unit production manager, you get to know these off-production crew in very intimately, in the sense of how they budget, how they move, what they require. And that goes from, rigging grips, rigging electrics, construction, set dressing. These are all huge things. And truthfully, those are the departments that can throw the budget off, one way or another, very easily in one day, if it's not kept track of and done correctly, or with a precision skill. So for a unit production manager and a producer, those are very important departments that as an AD, you don't know who they are. Do you remember any of those guys? No. And this is something you learn when you start to go up there, that you have to trust the shooting crew is going to do what they do, and now you have to take care of everything so that when they show up, it's ready for them. So in like-minded, a second AD gets all the elements ready, which is the actors, and make sure that all the specific additional people, labor for the next day are there and aware of what's going on ahead of time. They're the front runner to that. But as a UPM and a producer, you're working with your team to make sure that everything else exists for them, and goes away afterwards.
When you're thinking about the 100 different tasks involved in whatever project, though, is there any software or anything?
Yeah, it's called a little notebook and a pen. That's what I mean, look, I make my own Excel spreadsheets and stuff, or I'll write my memos, or whatever. But I'll sit in a conference room and I'll take notes. I have my little notebook, but I have a budget, and the budget dictates, to almost to the only degree, but to a large degree of how we're going to handle something. And so I have my notebook that has those pages in it, that is, and when I make everyone's deals, before we start a show. So I know, what it takes, how many people they're going to need and whatnot. And we get the breakdowns in the beginning of a show from each of those department heads saying, this is how many people I need on these days for this kind of stuff. And you have to monitor that and watch that and make sure that they're staying in line with that, to handle it. So for me, it's a little notepad and a pen, and I have a notebook with my budget in it. If I'm at my desk, I've got my computer. But
is there a certain type of notebook that you like per se, or is it just
just whatever? Like in different countries, I've found some in Colombia that I really like, that I bought a whole bunch of, that have like a little strap around it that's the size of half the size of my phone, and that's it. And I keep a red pen and my nice pen that I sign all the checks with. And that's my tools that I carry with me every day, because if you're going to sign really big checks, you want a nice pen.
Right. One of our last questions is, because we're running out of time, when you are working as an AD or UPM, you're almost, in a way, kind of leading the crew and the cast, in safety. You're leading them, towards efficiency. So people are seeing you as a leader, somebody that's got their best interests in mind. What are some books or things you've read over the years that have helped you in your leadership?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll tell you the early ones, and it's going to sound maybe off, maybe not, is Sun Tzu's The Art of War. So there's a book from, thousands of years ago. He was a Chinese general that came up with the rules of war. And I know it sounds like, what does that have to do with anything? But like chapter 5 or whatever the chapter is a note where it says an army travels on its stomach. And that's absolutely true, because, you have to keep people well taken care of is the general idea behind that. So I always make sure I have a lot of food for my crew. I get trucks in all the time. I have a big craft service budget because it helps them perform better. And ultimately, that's not a huge expense that we can work out in a budget that everyone feels taken care of. And when people feel taken care of, they work harder for you. I think there's some out-of-date books that don't apply anymore. But if you want to learn about it, being an assistant director, there's a book that was written. Every time I do it, I'm like, it's called. It's written by Jerry Ziesmer, and it's called Ready When You Are, Mr. Coppola, Mr. Spielberg, Mr. Yeah, okay, Mr. Crow. And I worked with him. I did Almost Famous with him, and actually I knew him for many years, and he's retired now. He's an older gentleman at this point, but he was the first AD on everything from Apocalypse Now to 1941 to Bloody Sunday. Like 100 of the biggest movies from the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. And he did Jerry Maguire. He's the coach. He's always acts in all his. He's the one. In Apocalypse Now that says terminate with extreme prejudice. He's the guy in Jerry Maguire that claps his hands when Cuba Gooding Jr. is knocked out there. Wake up, that guy. He's in all of the movies too, but he's a great AD, like one of the best in the world ever. And he has a book that talks about being an assistant director, and it's really great. It's a good resource if you haven't seen that. And there's a publicist, or a former publicist, I think he still does this. His name is Rob Harris, and he wrote a book, and I got to find it, and I will get you the information so you can tell your podcast listeners what it is, about a year in the life of working on Gladiator, A Perfect Storm, and 2 other movies in one solid year straight through. And the stories that he tells on it are really interesting about just the life of a gypsy filmmaker, of how we are when we go from show to show to show to show. For the actual mechanics of being an AD, there's some below-the-line books that you can get. I don't know if the scheduling ones that are out there are still up to date enough to recommend them. I did a webinar myself with a website called Stage 32, and it's called The Art and Mechanics of Being an Assistant Director. That webinar can teach you a lot more about the scheduling and breaking down. We actually go through a couple scenes in Jurassic World specifically, and you get stuff sent to you so that you can follow along. And I also have a couple other webinars that are free on there, question and answers that people ask me about being ADs that you can just click onto on that Stage 32 and listen to, or Google it and it might just come up. My name under the Art and Mechanics of Being an AD, and then there's nothing like talking to people who've been doing it for a long time like this. So if you're out there and you want to be an AD, find somebody that knows somebody. People are pretty accessible, and you have your top 10 questions ready to ask them, and they'll teach you. I love imparting knowledge if I can about certain things. I mean, I don't feel like we even scratch the surface of what it is we do, and because like I said, there's so many variables that every day is a different day, and so there's different ways to handle different things. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I have a list that's not with me here that I'll give you a couple, so you can, if you have a website that goes along with the podcast, you can put it up there and tell people where to get it.
Yeah, we can put it on the show notes.
Yeah.
Cool. So any last parting advice to future filmmakers that are interested in this AD route?
Or any route,
yeah.
I will leave you with this simple bit of information. You have to believe in yourself more than anybody else, because there's 1,000 other people that want to do it. And if you have the tenacity and the belief that you'll succeed, almost like you're manifesting it, and you give yourself 100% of the time, and willing to start and work your way up, whatever that takes, whether that's a second job, whether that's interning, whether that's just being a background artist and getting, yourself on a set so you can watch how it works. Whatever that is, wherever you are, you have to do the most you can do all the time. And I will say one other thing. Never make a good cup of coffee. Do everything else well, but don't make a good cup of coffee, because they'll only ask you to make coffee for them from that point on. So I was told that a long time ago, and I made terrible coffees. So I did everything else really well, but I'd never made a good cup of coffee.
I also am really bad at making coffee, so I will.
So you'll go far.
So if somebody wanted to follow you, are you on social media at all?
I am on no social media. Isn't that crazy?
How are they going to follow you?
They can go to my IMDb page and see what movies and TV shows I'm working on. But my dog has an Instagram account, Blueberry Roberts. There you go. That's it. But it's only my dog.
There you go.
And my wife handles that. So yeah, I don't have any social media accounts at all. So unfortunately,
that's okay.
There you go.
You're good with your notebook and.
Yeah, exactly. I am a Luddite, right?
Hey, thanks, Jason.
No,
so much.
thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
I hope I helped people out there learn a little more about what we do. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please visit us on iTunes, leave a comment, subscribe, and tell a friend. If you'd like to stay up to date with what we're doing, you can visit the blog at assistantdirecting.com and sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, where we will notify you of the new episodes and highlight interesting technology and software in the film industry.